am presenting Union Gospel Press's Sunday School Lesson number 6, Sunday, July 7th, 2024. The lesson is entitled, Hannah Commits Her Son to God. Lesson text comes from 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 20 and 26 through 28, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Related scriptures are 1 Samuel 1, 1 through 19, 21 through 25, 2:18 through 21, Psalms 113, 1 through 9, Luke 1, 46 through 55, 67 through 80. The places are Ramah and Shiloh. The times are about 1102 to 1105 BC. Have you ever wondered why you are here on earth or why you were born at this particular juncture in history? We could have been born at an earlier time or at a later time, but God had a purpose in putting you and me in this world at this time. This week's lesson shows us that we are here by divine planning and purpose. Today's aim, facts, to show that Samuel was given as a gift in answer to prayer. Principle, to emphasize that God of 10 works in response to our prayers. Application, to assure students that God has a special plan for each of his children. Illustrating the lesson, God works his special plans in answer to our prayers. In fact, God's best for us often comes out of our desperate needs. Practical points. 1. We should give tangible acknowledgement when the Lord hears and answers our prayers. 1 Samuel 1:20. 2. It is good to give testimony to God's answers to our prayers so that others can join in our praise. Verses 26 through 28. 3. God's answers to our prayers are intended to increase our delight in him. 2:1 through 2. 4. Pride in one's status is foolish, for the Lord can overturn circumstances in an instant. Verses 3 through 5. 5. Everything we have is from the Lord's hand. There is no room for boasting or smug treatment of others. Verses 6 through 8. 6. The Lord strengthens the weak who wait in faith upon him. Those who are confident in their own strength will be overthrown. Verses 9 through 10. Golden text. There is none holy as the Lord, for there is none beside thee, neither is there any rock like our God. 1 Samuel 2:2. Today we have 3 lesson outlines. The first is Hannah's answered prayer. 1 Samuel 1:20 and 26 through 28. The second is Hannah's song of joy. None holy as the Lord. 1 Samuel 2:1 through 5. And the third is Hannah's song, God thunders from heaven. 1 Samuel 2:6 through 10. Introduction. Psalms 37:4 reads, Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. A good example of this promise is the story of Hannah and her son Samuel. Often, God's people are so lax in claiming this promise when the truth of the verse is so simple. American Heritage Dictionary defines delight as a great pleasure and joy, or something that gives great pleasure or enjoyment. Should it not be so that the Lord is our greatest source of pleasure and joy? We must admit that while the expectations in Psalm 37:4 sound simple, the difficulty of obeying it comes from our living in a world of temptation. Hannah's answered prayer. 1 Samuel 1:20. Wherefore it came to pass, when the time was come about Hannah had conceived, that she bare a son and called him his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked him of the Lord. Verse 2. And she said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here, praying unto the Lord. Verse 27. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition, which I asked of thee. Verse 28. Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshipped the Lord there. Her son, 1 Samuel 1, 20 and 26. Elkanah's two wives were Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah remained barren. Since it was the desire of Jewish women to have at least one son, perhaps hoping he might be the Messiah, this was very painful for Hannah. Her pain was magnified by Peninnah's heartless reminders of her condition, verse 6. Peninnah especially enjoyed making her cruel remarks during the annual festivals in Shiloh, where the Lord's tabernacle was kept. During one especially sorrowful time in Shiloh, Hannah wept and prayed so fervently that Eli the priest accused her of being drunk. Upon assuring him that she had not been drinking, Hannah explained that she was simply pouring out her anguished soul to God. Eli then blessed her, asking that God would grant her request. 1 Samuel 1, 13 through 17. When Hannah left Eli's presence, she was no longer despondent, verse 18, giving evidence of her faith in the God to whom she had been praying so fervently. Sometime later, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son she named Samuel. The name Samuel in Hebrew sounds like heard by God. The baby's name itself would testify that God hears and answers prayer. After Samuel was weaned, Hannah took him to Shiloh and presented him to Eli. Her response, 1 Samuel 1, 27 through 28. In 1 Samuel 1:11, we read that Hannah had vowed to the Lord, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man child, then will I give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. This was a promise to God that she would give the son she received back to him for a life of divine service. When Hannah reappeared before Eli, she first reminded him of who she was and then presented Samuel as the answer to her prayers. Eli probably remembered that he had at first considered her to be drunk. And in his position, Eli apparently had seen others in that condition. We are especially told that his own sons were very corrupt. They cheated worshipers out of the best parts of their sacrifices, 1 Samuel 2, 12 through 17, and even went so far as to be immoral with the women who came to worship, verse 22. In Eli's culture, Hannah was a shining example of a truly godly woman. One of her greatest acts of godliness was taking place as she brought Samuel to Eli and consecrated him to serve the Lord the rest of his life. The word lent is unusual in this context, but its Hebrew root is the same that is found in petition, verses 17 and 28, and asked in verse 20, suggesting a word play. The gift given to her by God is given back to him. Hannah's song of joy, none holy as the Lord. Chapter 2, verse 1. And Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoices in the Lord. Mine horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth is enlarged over mine enemies, because I rejoices in thy salvation. Verse 2. There is none holy as the Lord, for there is none beside thee, neither is there any rock like our God. Verse 3. Talk no more so exceeding proudly. Let no arrogancy come out of your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. Verse 4. The bows of the mighty men are broken, and they that stumbled are girded with strength. Verse 5. They that were full have hired out themselves for bread, and they that were hungry ceased, so that the barren have borne seven, and she that have children is waxed feeble. God's salvation. 1 Samuel 2, 1 through 2. The heart attitude of Hannah is indeed amazing. God had finally given her a son, the greatest desire she had ever known. Now she was giving him back to God, leaving him with the priest and knowing he would no longer live in her home. Instead of mourning and longing for things to be different, Hannah humbled her heart before God in worship. Hannah's prayer is a remarkable expression of joy in the Lord. The song has strong verbal and conceptual connections to David's song near the end of 2 Samuel 22, 2 through 51, and to Mary's song when she learned she was to give birth to the Messiah in Luke 1:46 through 55. Hannah began her prayer with an expression of rejoicing in the Lord. She then acknowledged that God had exalted her to such a degree that she could smile at her enemies. A horn was a symbol of strength. God had provided salvation from the curse of barrenness and the accompanying shame heaped upon her by others, including Peninnah. No longer was Hannah an embarrassment to her husband for not giving him a male heir. No longer could others mock and belittle her. No longer would she suffer the depression she had known. In this glorious provision, Hannah saw the working of the holy God. She celebrated God's unique holiness. There is none like him. In referring to him as a rock, she used a metaphor that speaks of his being strength for his own, a place of refuge for those in need, and a deliverer from trouble. God's knowledge. 1 Samuel 2, 3 through 4. Hannah's words now sound like she had experienced so much grief from others during her barren condition that she felt compelled to warn them about brash talking. After all, those who had belittled her now had to face the fact that they were wrong. In their pride, they had ignored the fact that God can do whatever he wants and can therefore reverse any situation as he had done for her. Pride and arrogance should never come from the mouth of humans, for God is the God of knowledge, and his knowledge is far superior to that of all humanity. Hannah knew that she did not need to get even with those who persecuted her. God weighs what people do and say against his children, and he himself determines what needs to be done to defend them. Beginning in 1 Samuel 2:4, 7 contrasts are listed in Hannah's prayers or song, as many prefer to call it. This contrast is between those who are mighty and those who are weak. Reference to bows indicates weaponry used by the strong against the weak. In some cases, the weapons might be words instead of physical weapons. Such was the case for Hannah. But God had broken the strength of her enemies, belittling words and giving them nothing more to say against her. At the same time, God had clothed her with new strength. She walked with her head held up and rejoiced in the Lord who had provided her salvation. God's justice. 1 Samuel 2:5. Two more contrasts are mentioned in this verse. The first is between the full and the hungry, and the second is between the barren and the fertile. As in each of the other contrasts, Hannah reflected on the fact that God can completely change any circumstance he wishes at any time. Here is an example of how fleeting riches can be and why we should not place our trust in possessions. The one who once was full was at a time wealthy enough to never worry about food. When God removes the wealth, however, that person must work for wages in order to buy what is needed. On the other hand, when God chooses to bless someone who is poor, that person once regularly suffered hunger now has plenty. Hannah's point was that God can easily bring about such a change whenever he determines it. She then made a much more personal application of the principle by referring to one who was barren. After Samuel's birth, Hannah eventually gave birth to 5 more children, verse 21. Her mention of 7 children in verse 5 is reference to the perfection this number stood for. Having Samuel made her feel complete and fulfilled. She felt strong and blessed as opposed to others who may have given birth to many but lacked the same sense of God's blessing upon them. Hannah's song, God thunders from heaven, verse 6. The Lord killeth and maketh alive. He bringeth down to the grave and bringeth up, verse 7. The Lord maketh poor and maketh rich. He bringeth low and lifteth up, verse 8. He raises up the poor out of the dust and lifteth up the beggar from the dunghill, to set them among princes and to make them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he have set the world upon them, verse 9. He will keep the feet of his saints, and the wicked shall be silent in darkness. For by strength shall no man prevail, verse 10. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Out of heaven shall he thunder upon them. The Lord shall judge the ends of the earth, and he shall give strength unto his king, and exalt the horn of his anointed. God's control, 1 Samuel 2, 6 through 7. It probably was not a conscious change of thought for Hannah at this point in her prayer, but she did seem to begin to reflect more seriously now than before. Her rejoicing turned to serious contemplation of exactly how God sovereignly oversees the situations people face. There is a sense in which she moved away from being very personal and began to think more generally. Hannah recognized that all life is in the hand of God. He alone has the power and authority to give and take life, 1 Samuel 2:6. His power is so great that he can even resurrect those who are dead. The second statement of this verse is nearly synonymous with the first part, but serves to heighten or intensify the Lord's sovereignty in commanding life and death. God also has control over the status in life each person experiences, something Hannah had already mentioned in 1 Samuel 2:5. While people may think their success is due solely to their ingenuity and hard work, it is really the blessing of God that makes a person rich. Proverbs 10:22. He likewise can cause the disappearance of riches from those who have them. God's help, 1 Samuel 2:8. Hannah was particularly thankful that God helps those in need, for she had just witnessed his helping hand with her great need. To illustrate this truth graphically, she spoke of how God can raise a beggar to a position of wealth and honor. She described someone who sat in the dust and among ashes, not having a nice home or the comfort of clean and new clothing. This person had nothing to eat unless someone kindly gave him food or money. God, however, sometimes reaches down to such a person and dramatically causes a change of circumstances that is almost unbelievable. Instead of begging, he may suddenly find himself seated among those who have plenty and respected by all those around him. There is no need to speculate exactly how God does such a thing, for his ways are infinite, and he is able to accomplish some things like this with anyone. The reason we can maintain hope in the midst of trials is that everything in the universe is God's and under his complete control. Hannah spoke of the earth as being supported by pillars. While we know that is not literally so, her point was that everything on earth is stable because God is in control of it. Psalms 104:5. He may or may not choose to give us the wealth of princes, but no matter what he chooses, his choices are good and right. God's power, 1 Samuel 2:9-10. Hannah concluded her prayer with one final contrast. God will take good care of his saints, but he will judge and destroy all those who are his wicked adversaries. She knew it was safe for saints to walk through life, for God guards their steps. At the same time, she knew it was dangerous to ignore God and his ways, for eventually those who do so will be silenced by eternal darkness and broken forever. The Lord will thunder upon them in judgment from his place in heaven. Hannah also had amazing insight into the truth that by strength shall no man prevail. 1 Samuel 2:9. Psalms 33:17 reads, "And horse is a vain thing for safety, neither shall he deliver any by his great strength." A similar thought is found in Proverbs 21:31, which says, "The horse is prepared against the day of battle, but safety is of the Lord. No human army or cavalry can win against the Lord." Hannah's final statement has a prophetic element to it. He shall give strength unto his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. 1 Samuel 2:10. The prophetic reference to a king is important, for Samuel was born when Israel had no king. Yet this Samuel grew up to anoint David as king. The Hebrew word translated anointed here is Mashiach or Messiah. David himself wrote a song with many variable and conceptual connections with Hannah's song that is placed near the end of 2 Samuel 23:1-7. In the final days of his reign, by faith, Israel could look forward to the coming of the true Messiah, Jesus. Questions. 1. Why was the birth of Samuel so important to Hannah? 2. Why did Hannah feel it was necessary to present Samuel to Eli? 3. How did Hannah express what she felt was her exaltation? 4. In what way did she experience the salvation of the Lord? 1 Samuel 2:1. 5. What were Hannah's thoughts concerning those who had spoken cruelly toward her? 6. What do we learn about the lack of security and riches from Hannah's prayer? 7. What did Hannah say about God's control over life? 8. Why could Hannah be certain that God can elevate whomever he wishes? 9. What final contrast did Hannah make to encourage God's children? 10. Who was the anointed, verse 10, of whom Hannah spoke? This concludes the Sunday school lesson for Sunday, July 7th, 2024. Thank you for listening. God bless.